So today our topic is going to be about condition inspections, the kind of the last piece or the second to last piece in our webinars. So we started back in February or January with kind of 6 webinars that we had planned. The first one was an introduction to kind of the 5 power-ups or the 5 things that I think really can improve any safety approach or any safety program that you've got going out there. If you do these 5 things very well, then you can always improve, no matter whether if you're just starting or whether you've got a mature program, if you can put some effort into these things. And so that's why they look like little batteries on this slide. I call them my little power-ups, but you got to start off with getting people involved. And then you got to be able to understand and know what your risk is about. You can go back and take a look at some of that in our previous webinars. We talked about communication last month and how it drives alignment and our culture adoption within our teams. So today is kind of the day that we start putting all of the little pieces together into making something that really helps us as we go out and we're doing safety and health in the field. And that has to do with condition inspections. Now, before I do that really quick, I just want to make one quick announcement. I've been working with a friend of mine who has a need for a safety professional in his organization. So if you know of anybody that might be interested in a job, this job is going to fall somewhere between being a manager and maybe a director or a senior manager, somewhere along those lines. The position is located here in Utah, and it's working with a good company that's got a good reputation and certainly a leadership team that's excited about health and safety. If you know anybody that is interested or might be able to or might be interested in finding out more about that position, just have them reach out to me in my email, and I'm going to go ahead and put my email right now in the chat. You just type it correctly. So if you know of anybody who would like some more information about this particular position, or you might know somebody that may be looking for a job in HSE that lives here in Salt Lake or in the Salt Lake City area and would be interested in working with a good company, please have them just drop me their resume or a note, and I'll be happy to talk with them about this and pass their information on. Okay, so back to this, we're going to talk about inspections today and doing condition inspections. So the thing I always think about, there are all kinds of different inspections. It could be housekeeping, it could be a safety inspection, environmental inspection, it could be a pre-shift inspection of your equipment. It could be all kinds of different inspections that are going on. But today I want to talk a little bit about probably 2, or the most common one that I see and that I do is really a condition inspection, where you have the opportunity to walk around in your operation and take a look at how things are. One of the reasons that this is really good at building culture, again, it gets the leaders out into the field. You have a chance to engage with your team members, and that's really great. One of the things that I've learned over the course of my career, many years doing health and safety, is that this is true. If you want someone to act like a pig, then just put them in a sty. And I can't hardly imagine what it would be like having to come to work in this particular shop every day with the housekeeping the way that it is. I'm sure you can see there are probably several safety violations, things that OSHA might write up if they were to visit this workplace and if people were working here. Again, so much of how people act and how they behave and how they work together being safely, how they work with each other, how they help each other to be safe, how they encourage good behavior, happens to be with what the working conditions look like. So please, when you go out and you do your inspections, make sure that you compliment and comment on people that go above and beyond to keep their work area clean and tidy. And if you come across places like this, as a leader, it behooves all of us to help the owners, the people that work in this area, to have some inspiration to kind of clean things up. All right, so the first thing I think about when I'm talking about inspections is I like to grab a floor plan of the plant or the facility. And first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that we've got this plant divided up so that we've got for 2 things. Number one, we know somebody who's going to be responsible for keeping track of the day-to-day stuff. Somebody who works in the area and is familiar with the equipment. And again, this was just a floor plan or a blueprint that I found online, and I marked it up to show you what I mean. But you may go through and put people's names on a map to show who is responsible. And you could use this in a housekeeping type inspection to say, you know, that Braden is responsible for the main plant area here and keeping that nice and tidy, while Ryan's got whatever that is out over in that room. That I would say maybe that's a mechanical room or some sort of a tank room, something like that, so that you know who to, number one, is responsible for keeping that area kind of clean and maintained. And then the other thing that you can do with this is that you can then take different people who are actively involved and engaged in your safety program and have them do inspections in these areas. So if you train up Jane, Ray, Rex, Ryan, and Ann, and Bryn or Braden, and get them all trained up on how to do inspections, they can work together to do inspections in either their own area or their neighboring areas. And again, the more eyes you put on a location or a problem, the better off things go when it comes to this. So this is something that I've just learned over the course of my career. Take a floor plan of your plant, take a map of your facility, and go through and delineate and say, these are the people who are responsible for not only inspecting these different areas, but helping keep them clean and in a safe operating condition. So I thought what we would do today is, since there are so many different types of inspection and so many things that could be seen or could be done out there, would be to just take a few minutes and walk through the OSHA top 10 citations from last year and talk about what it is that I particularly look for when I'm out there on an inspection. And this is an opportunity. I know that it becomes a little challenging in this format, especially where we don't all know each other and maybe a little bit uncomfortable speaking in front of a group. But I would like to encourage you to use the raise your hand button, which would put the hand up and notify me that you have something to say. Or if you can, just jump right in, unmute your mic and jump in if you have thoughts about the type of inspection or the things that you might be looking for if you're out on a plant inspection and you see somebody wearing fall protection, for example, or whatever it is that they may be doing while they're outside or while they're working. So what I've done is I've just taken the list of the OSHA top 10 citations from last year and thought about, if I were out walking through a plant, these would be a really good thing to maybe be looking for, because you'll know that if an OSHA inspector is coming through your plant, these are the things that are catching their attention. There's obviously a compliance agenda that they may be going through and working on. And these are the things that they're seeing out in places, which gives us an idea about what they're looking for. Not that this is a complete list. There's lots of other things. I have to tell a little story. A while ago, I was leading a class and was helping people prepare to take their certified safety professional exam. And during our breaks, we would put up questions from the exam that people could answer. And I had an engineer who was an operations guy. He wasn't a safety professional, come up to me afterwards and said to me, kind of exasperated, I didn't realize that safety people had to know so many different disciplines and things. Well, that's something that everybody on this call knows and understands, but not a lot of people do know all of the things that we touch. So there could be much more on the inspections than what we're going to touch on today. But here are just some of my thoughts. And again, I encourage anybody on the call to either raise their hand, put up their hand, or just jump right in, unmute your mic and jump in if there's something about an inspection that we talk about that could be useful for the rest of the group. So we're going to kick off with the number one cited standards that OSHA did last year. And the first one was fall protection. So whenever I'm out on a site, there's several things that I look for when it comes to fall protection. If I actually see people working and they're in a place where it's safe for me to speak with them, I want to ask them questions like, what did you inspect this morning on your equipment? Or how do you inspect your equipment? Can you show me how it is that you would inspect this particular harness or this lifeline or this lanyard? How was it that you decided that this was the appropriate equipment to use? And then tell me about your tie-off, for example. So a tie-off on a fall protection, fall arrest type situation is going to require that it would hold 5,000 pounds per individual that's tied off to them. And in my past, and I've seen places where people would take their lanyard and tie it off to a piece of all thread that's supporting a cable tray. Anybody on this call think that that would support somebody in the event that they went to fall? No, but again, people don't always remember their training, and they know that they're supposed to be tied off, and sometimes there are difficult places, where there are not great tie-off points above their head and neck. Or there may not be something that seems strong enough. So they'll tie off to a handrail. Anybody know what the problem with tying off to a handrail is? Handrails, again, are not designed for that 5,000-pound tie off. So what happens is you tie off to the handrail, you fall off, you break the handrail off, then you hit the ground, and then to add insult to injury, the handrail falls on top of you as you land, right? So again, this is part of the reason the OSHA is so out there looking at fall protection, is because it is one of those places where people get seriously hurt, and there's a lot of moving pieces to that. Before I move on to the next kind of inspection item that I would talk about, has anybody got any comments or stories, things like that would help us to better understand fall protection and what you might look for if you're out on an inspection and you come across people working? Evelyn, you look like you've got something to say. If you can unmute. Maybe I have to, let me try. Nope, I'm having a hard time getting you to unmute. Can you unmute, Evelyn? Will it let you? I can see your lips moving. Oh, now you're showing as unmuted. Can you say something? Still not hearing you. Okay, well, we'll come back to Evelyn if she can figure out, or maybe make her computer work a little bit better. Thank you. All right, so we're going to move on to the next piece, which is hazard communication. Now, again, this may not necessarily be a good photo of hazard communication. Hazard communication really has to do with the global harmonization standard, proper labeling of chemicals and other things that are in the workplace. And maybe this is a much better picture of storage and appropriate storage of barrels. Again, not certain that these barrels would meet the strength requirement, especially if they're full, to be stacked this high. I'm not certainly not a manufacturer of them, don't know what all of this is. As a safety professional, this would be something that I question. But just from a stacking and safety standpoint, to keep these things from falling over or tipping over and crushing somebody. But from a hazard communication standpoint, I don't see very many labels on these. Again, in this picture, this could be something that maybe these are empty. And again, so I don't know all of the context behind this photo, but it would certainly be something that I would question if I found this while I was out on an inspection. And one of the things that I would question is, what's in these barrels? Is there something that's dangerous? Is there a chemical in there? Do we need to have an appropriate label on them? Is it a hazardous waste? Is it a not hazardous waste? Is it a fresh product that has some hazards? To me, it seems like if I were inspecting this, that I would be looking. And so we want to make sure that when we go out and we do an inspection and we're dealing with either large storage like this, or even small things like in a flammable cabinet, or in a chemical storage cabinet, that we've got the appropriate labels on the containers, that we've got the appropriate chemicals stored together, and that that you're not mixing oxidizers and reducers in the same cabinet. Or one of the things that I see quite regularly is storage of combustible materials with flammable materials. This could also be communication about, what is in this and what are we supposed to do if this has a leak. Another thing that you might think about under hazard communication, which is the second highest number of citations written by OSHA last year, has to do with SDS availability. Do we have a system in place where team members or employees can get an SDS about whatever chemical it is that they're working with, or whatever it is that might be being stored there? So let's make sure that all of those pieces, go back and read the SDS, or the Hazard Communication Standards, one of the newer ones, certainly something that OSHA is focused on out in the workplace, something where we can make some positive inroads. Okay. Comments or questions about HAZCOM before we move on? Okay. Third topmost category that OSHA cited last year was ladders. And as I look at this picture, I have a hard time finding anything that I see is wrong. But ladders, as I go out and inspect in my own operations where I have responsibility for, or working with other clients where they have, I see a lot of violation of ladders. Some of the things that can go wrong or that you ought to be paying attention to with ladders would be using and selecting the appropriate ladder for the job, meaning an A-frame or a self-supporting ladder should not be used as an extension ladder. This ladder that we've got in this photo here looks to me to be in pretty good condition. I don't see any visible damage to it. It's interesting that they've actually got it tied off underneath the eaves, which is a good practice to have when you're using an extension ladder so it doesn't slide side to side. And from the angle that the photograph is taken, looks like that the angle for the ladder is correct. I noticed that the team member that's climbing the ladder actually has both hands on the ladder and both feet. So watching folks from a behavioral standpoint to make sure that they have 3 points of contact on the ladder at a time while they're transitioning is a good thing, and that this particular individual is already prepared with their fall protection. One other thing that I notice in this picture is that the ladder, if that is a platform on that roof that he's climbing up to, I'm going to assume that it's a roof from this photo. It looks like it's a house. They have it tied off, and you can see that from the counting the rungs, there's at least 3 rungs that extend above the top of the roof, which if you're using a ladder as a place to transition onto a working platform or to another location, you've got to have at least 3 feet. One way to know that for sure is to count the rungs that extend above where the person would step off of the ladder. And in this case, it appears that they've got that set up. Lots of really great things going on here. If I were out doing an inspection, I would certainly comment on those things. Other things about ladders is, again, making sure that you're choosing the right ladder for the job that you're doing. A fixed ladder or a self-supporting ladder may not, be the best ladder or choice to be used if you're trying to transition between platforms. There are other types of ladders that can be used, extension ladders and fixed ladders. If you're inspecting fixed ladders, if they're taller than 24 feet, I believe is the standard, then they have to have a cage around the back of them. They have to have offsets if the ladders are taller than 30 feet. Things like that ought to be things that all safety professionals are looking at when we're out there taking on ladders. Anybody got any comments or questions about ladders that they'd like to share with the group? Okay. Any experiences when you've had a ladder or done some inspection around ladders that could be shared by the rest of the team? If not, then we'll move on to the next one. Respiratory protection, item number 4. Man, there's so much to talk about when it comes to respirators. You have to make sure that you've got the right respirator for the condition. For example, would you use a half mask air purifying respirator like is in this photo here, or should they maybe be using a self-contained or some other air supplying respirator in a situation? What about the cartridge and cartridge selection? There's so many different types of cartridges out there. You need to make sure that you've got the right ones if you're using an air purifying respirator. Or maybe this one should require a full face respirator. Each respirator has its own rating as far as what it can protect against and with. And so if you're not sure what type of respirator needs to be used, then please make sure that you reach out. There are a lot of good industrial hygienists around in the valley. There are a lot of folks that can help you figure out and make sure that you've got the right respirator, that you're using that in the right kind of environment. One of the things that I've seen is that a lot of times people will grab an air purifying respirator, but they want to use it in a confined space, which can be appropriate if you have the appropriate air if the air quality in the confined space is correct, but something that certainly needs to be checked and made sure that it's right. One thing in this photo is we've got a guy with his respirator on, but no eye protection. Always makes me curious as to why somebody would wear a hard hat and a respirator, but no protection for the eyes. If you're in the workplace, that would be something that I would look for and look towards. So again, if you're out inspecting, make sure that you're looking. If people are wearing respirators, make sure that you've got them on the right way. There is the appropriate use of a dust mask that may not be required by the company, but if you're allowing your employees to wear a dust mask, they have to fill out Appendix D and they have to be made aware of what the standards are when it comes to that. Another thing about respiratory protection that I would say comes up during inspections is if you come across a toolbox where there's a respirator stored, is it stored appropriately? Can anybody tell me the appropriate way or the proper way to store, say, a respirator like this fellow's wearing an air purifying half face respirator? Does anybody know what the appropriate way to store that would be? We just throw it in a hard hat and throw it in the toolbox? If you're not so sure that you want to speak out loud, you can certainly throw something in the chat and let us know, but I'll answer my own question in that. The respirator, the cartridges should be removed and stored in a separate location. I like to use Ziploc baggies that are closed so that it protects the cartridges from becoming contaminated. Before I put them into some sort of storage, I would store them separate from the face piece itself. And the face piece should be cleaned and stored in a clean manner before, also in a Ziploc baggie, but not in the same container as the cartridges. Many times in my career, I've walked out and found in toolboxes where people have just thrown respirators or they just hang them on the wall, not any kind of protection. And you think about having to put that respirator on the next time that you need it. That could be an issue. That could be a problem. So lots of things to consider about respirators. Anybody got anything else that they'd like to add? Feel free to throw it in the chat or just jump right in and let us know. All right, down to number 5 on the list. Lockout tagout is a place for OSHA to be inspecting or writing citations. And there's many things that you should be considering if you come across during a condition inspection at your site, somebody working under a lockout tagout. Do they have their own lock? Do they have the appropriate lock and tag on? Are they following their company procedures as well as the OSHA standards that go along with that? There's a lot of confusion. I came across a site the other day where we had some contractors working inside of a machine that was locked out by our operations folks, but none of the contractors had their lock on that. And of course, you can all see how that would be a scary situation. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that everybody's got their own lock, that they all know where the lockout points are. If you're evaluating or inspecting your lockout processes or your procedures, make sure that you're considering all of the sources of energy, not just electrical, but there can be steam, there can be some other sort of mechanical energy. You can have kinetic and potential energy. One time I had a fellow thinking he was safe and working under a piece of supported equipment. Well, when the equipment that was being supported, when the jack failed, then the piece of equipment came down on him. We didn't have it appropriately locked out. So look to make sure that all of those conditions are met. Lockout locks need to have a tag identifying who they belong to, so it's easy for you to go and see. If you're auditing the policy and procedure, make sure that there are methods in place for testing to make sure that things are locked out and that all of the communication that's supposed to be happening around a lockout tagout take place. And before I move on to the next one, has anybody got any thoughts about inspections and when you come across work that's going on with the lockout tagout? Okay.
Hey Brian, Karen's got some comments here.
Okay.
You're live, Karen.
Oh no, I just wanted to say one thought came to mind is that people also need to remember the difference between authorized personnel and affected personnel or employees when it comes to lockout tagout, right?
That's very good. Yep, correct. So the difference between an authorized and affected is anybody working in the area where a lockout is taking place is affected. And anybody who is authorized to either place the lock or work on the piece of equipment would be the authorized people. And there is different training that goes along for both affected and authorized people. So make sure that we've got the right people in there doing the right stuff. Also, when I look at this photo, I think about electrical stuff and reminding that buckets and other places in a motor control center can be fed from multiple locations. And so you have to make sure that you're locking out all the appropriate places. All right, the next one, item 6 on the OSHA list, is the powered industrial trucks. Most often referred to, or what we see, as forklifts, but there can be other things. I see a lot of operations that are using either side-by-sides or gators or some sort of other vehicle that also counts as a powered industrial truck. Sometimes those little Cushman pickups that you see running around in a factory can be that. There are a lot of things, especially when it comes to forklifts, that I think about when I'm out doing an inspection. One thing is the floor of the warehouse or the floor of the truck. If there happen to be loading the truck, do we have a procedure for making sure that whatever we're driving that forklift or that powered industrial truck over can support the weight of that truck? So for example, if you're loading a semi-trailer, are the floorboards appropriate to support the weight of the truck that's going in and out? One time I had a warehouse where I was inspecting, and the concrete was so old that it was starting to spall and to break down, and potholes had formed. So that's one of the ways that somebody driving a forklift across that pothole can either tip the forklift over or drop a load, and any of those kind of things that are happening. Also, so not just the powered industrial truck themselves, but let's be looking at all of the situations around it. Many locations now require flashing lights on their forklift, and I've seen some kind of best practices where, in fact, I saw this in the airport in Salt Lake City the other day, the little golf cart that was carrying people up and down the corridor had a little blue light out in front of it so that you could see where it was actually driving. I've seen those mounted to forklifts. So that's just kind of some of the conditions around the powered industrial truck. On the powered industrial truck themselves, seatbelt usage seems to be one that I routinely see where people jump on a forklift or a piece of equipment inside of a plant and don't fasten their seatbelt. It is required to be used and needs to be taken care of. All of the lighting on the equipment, the horn, the backup alarm, all of that stuff needs to be in good working order. The condition of the tires, the conditions of the labels on the vehicle itself as far as what each lever does. And also on a forklift, there has to be a nameplate and a nameplate capacity that says what the forklift can lift, and that needs to be legible and it has to be in place. So whenever you're inspecting and you come across a forklift or other powered industrial truck, look for those things. One other thing that you might look for while you're out doing an inspection and you come across forklifts would be operator training. They may not have that training documentation with them, but it's always a good thing to go back and make sure that the people that are operating that piece of equipment have been appropriately trained and certified to operate that forklift, and they're operating it within the capacity. One time I was out doing an inspection during my career, and I came around the corner and we had 3 people on a forklift. They had the forks were loaded, and they had the operator sitting in the operator chair, and they had 2 other folks sitting on the back of the counterweight. So of course that had to be stopped at that moment. You had to have a discussion about it. When asking them, well, why do you have these 2 people sitting on the back? Well, because the load is so heavy that when we pick it up, the back tires come off. So in their ingenious problem solution and solving method was to take a couple of big guys and sit them on the back of the forklift to provide that balance. That would be not using the forklift in an appropriate way, and certainly incredibly dangerous. The amount of energy that's involved in a forklift, because they are so heavy, collisions with people can be very, very damaging and very, very scary and can cause serious injuries. So one of the things that you need to inspect if we got the right capacity of forklift operating. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments about forklifts while you're out, and if you're in a warehouse situation, things that you might look at? Feel free to throw something up in the chat or to jump in.
Brian, we have a comment from Karen again.
Okay, Karen?
Hi, this is from an experience that my occupational on-site forklift instructor had encountered, and he put a stop to it, and I thought it was nice to share with the team that when I sent him out to do an on-site certification, and the forklift that these people were using, or this company were using, the seatbelt was not functioning. Like, it was all jacked up and stuff, and it was not operable. So he didn't continue the training. He said, you either have to fix that because that's an OSHA compliance violation, or I'm sorry, I won't do the training. So I thought that that was good, that some of these things are very important. As something small as the seatbelt, it can be, the outcome can be really, and it can hurt the company in return if they don't fix that. Like you said in the inspection, when you report those things and those discrepancies need to be handled or fixed.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Yes. And I think it emphasizes the importance of stop work obligation. If you see something that's not right, you have an obligation to make it correct and move it forward, but especially during an inspection. And that brings us up to another point that I'd like to make about inspections. When you're out doing an inspection, if you find things that you can just fix while you're there, it's appropriate to document that on your inspection report. Hey, we found a can of gasoline that was not stored in an appropriate flammable cabinet the way it's supposed to be. Document it, but don't just walk by and leave it. Pick it up, go put it in the flammable cabinet where it belongs, and make it to where the situation is safe. So we want to make sure that as we're inspecting, if there are things that we can fix, that they get taken care of. And we'll talk a little bit about follow-up to that when we get through the list. The seventh most cited stuff from OSHA is fall protection training. We already talked a little bit about fall protection, but there are so many different types of fall protection, the way that they work, whether it's a self-retracting lifeline, whether you got some sort of horizontal lifeline, whether you're using fall restraint or fall prevention, or whether you're using some sort of fall arrest type system. There's a lot of different things that go on. There's a lot of things that you should know about and how they work. So one thing, again, if you're out on an inspection of a plant and you happen, or a work site, and you happen to come across, you need to make sure that you're checking the training records and verifying with the people who are actually performing the work that they have the appropriate training. Some things that I've seen wrong is one time I came across a welder who was welding. He was working from heights in his welding, and he was tied off as he should have been. But when he came down from that his platform to talk to me, he was wearing he was wearing a nylon harness, and he was wearing a nylon lanyard, which were not certified for welding, because welding spatter certainly melts that nylon and then things. So you can get the appropriate stuff. People don't always know, and if they haven't received the appropriate training, and that's why OSHA has been hammering us on things like fall protection and making sure that those training requirements are met. So if you're out there, you're doing an inspection, you come across people using fall protection, I want to emphasize again how important it is to make sure that the training records are right. So wherever they keep them, go in and audit it, find out who the people are that are working, look up their training records, make sure that they've been trained appropriately. Okay. Number 8 is scaffolding and the proper use of scaffolding. This is one of the standards under OSHA where they actually specify things like competent individual or competent person. In order to inspect scaffolding, to set up scaffolding, to make it to where it can be used, you have to have inspections, and that has to take place by a competent person. Most places that I've worked, there's a system where they put a tag on the access point to the scaffolding. So if you're out in a workplace and you have either people working up on scaffolding, or even if it is just there, it needs to be tagged. If you're using that scaffolding, it has to be inspected on a daily basis, and that needs to be documented. So you can see why there's a lot of parts and pieces that are going on there that would make it easy for an OSHA inspector to write a citation. But more importantly, there's a lot of places where scaffolding can fail and result in somebody getting hurt. So you want to make sure that we've got it done the right way and that things are done correctly. I recently took a scaffolding class again, and refreshed myself on all of the rules that go along with scaffolding, from everything on the types of scaffolding that can be used, where you have to put netting, when you have to have a toe board, what type of planking that you would be standing on, or platforms that you would put on for something to be standing on. So if you come across scaffolding in your workplace, if you're out doing an inspection, there are a lot of requirements. Go ahead and crack open the OSHA, either the 1910 or the 1926 versions of what the scaffolding requirement, because there are a few things that are different, but make sure that you are up to speed and understand all of the things that go on with scaffolding. Okay. And I would say that in a lot of industrial applications, I mean, I've got 2 plants right now that I know that I'm responsible for, where we're actually using scaffolding. We've got people on there. So we actually hired a competent person that could come on site and inspect the scaffolding on a daily basis and make sure that it's right. Okay. Comments or questions about scaffolding while you're out doing inspections? All right, then we'll move on to number 9, which is eye and face protection, part of PPE. And I kind of want to broaden this out to all of the personal protective equipment that people are wearing out there. We need to make sure that there is a risk assessment that has been done and that we're using the appropriate personal protective equipment. For example, I had an injury one time where an electrician was removing a breaker from a bucket and it flashed. He was just wearing the nylon mechanics gloves. Fortunately, he wasn't burned severely due to that arc flash, but he should have been wearing the appropriate high voltage gloves that had the leather gauntlets and other things like that. We had missed that on our risk assessment, and therefore we didn't specify the right equipment. So one of the things that you want to do is anywhere where you have people wearing personal protective equipment, you want to make sure that they've got it and that it's the right thing. And again, if you'll remember, as a safety professional, we want to make sure that we're using the hierarchy of controls, and PPE is the last kind of line of defense that we want to use. Now, I'm certainly not saying that there's any other way for us to weld without a welding shield. He needs to have that on the way that he is in this picture. But if you're using personal protective equipment, make sure that you're evaluating it. Is there ways that we can remove the hazard, or there are engineering controls that we can employ, or there are some other administrative controls? If not, then the last result is PPE, and we as safety professional owe it to the people that we're out with within our stewardship to make sure that they've got the right. By the way, I think this picture is pretty good. I don't see myself anything that is particularly wrong with the way that he's protected, but OSHA is writing a lot of citations around hearing and eye and face protection, making sure that people are using the right safety glasses. 2 weeks ago, when I was out on an operation working with them, I noticed that everybody was wearing their really cool Blades sunglasses, which do not have the appropriate ANSI designation, have not been approved for use in safety glasses. So I had to go back and get some safety glasses for everybody that was out there to make sure that we had their eye and face. Something to be checking on. I mean, if something doesn't look right, make sure that we're protecting things right. Also under face protection, which is what the OSHA standard has really been writing about, if you're grinding, if you're doing things that throw up small chunks of material, if you're in a chemical situation, it very much might be appropriate for us to be using a full face shield or goggles, not just safety glasses. You want to be making sure that you're doing things the right way. And again, I can't emphasize enough that with every piece of protective equipment that we put out on someone, there needs to be a risk assessment that determines what the hazards are and what the appropriate level of personal protective equipment that goes along with that. And if you need help with that, then of course, reach out to a safety professional or somebody that's been trained, a competent person, to help put those things together. Okay. The last piece that you should be looking for when you're out on inspections, and I didn't take this picture, I found this picture and it reminded me of a location that I worked at where we had lots of CNC machines. We had lots of robots that were stacking parts through the machining process. Machine guarding is its own kind of subfield in safety, as far as guards have to be control reliable if they're guarding a machine, and how that all works. There's whole ANSI standards and ASTM standards about how that goes. So to be an expert in guarding is a challenging thing, but you ought to be looking to make sure that guards are in place, that interlocks are being used appropriately. For example, you can't use an interlock on a guard door in order to lock something out. It has to be locked out at the motor control center or at the power supply. Make sure the guards are in place. I'll just share with you that last week I also took some additional training on powered presses, and the final test was 20 questions, and I had to take that test twice in order to pass it because the complexities around guarding, having to do with pullback devices and light curtains and pressure sensors in the floor and two-handed operation and all of those other kind of things. It's a very complex topic and a lot of opportunities out there where people can get seriously hurt working around machines. I have a son who works in a dairy, and they actually have 3 robots that actually do packaging. And constantly, I'm always asking him and bugging him about, hey, if you have to go in and reset that robot, or if that robot messes up and a box doesn't index right on the conveyor belt and it trips the robot, are you following lockout, tagout? Have you got the guards in place while you're operating? Are people trying to make the guards so that it's unoperable? I will also share that the first fatality that I had to deal with as a safety professional was in a mine. And there was a guard that was over a tail pulley on a conveyor belt. We were in the middle of winter, and the snow and the ice, the precipitation would run down the belt, and it would freeze on the tail pulley and cause the tail pulley to slip. And so this particular individual decided that it would be important to remove the guard and take a flat nose shovel and try and scrape the ice from the tail pulley while the conveyor was in operation, rather than stopping and locking it out. He got pulled into that tail pulley. There wasn't a whole lot left. I won't get too graphic about it. It was a pretty horrific scene. But at the end of the day, we found the bolts that held the guard in place in his jean pocket. He had removed that guarding. So again, it's something that easy thing for you to inspect as you're walking through a plant or through a workplace. If you've got machines that are being operated, you need to make sure that the guarding is correct, and that it's not only correct, that it's being used, and that can be on fixed machines or even portable hand tools like grinders and other things. Many times I find grinders that don't have the appropriate guard, and especially if you get bigger, most 4-inch grinders come from the factory with a guard designed for the wheel. But if you're using a 9-inch or a 13-inch grinder, many times the manufacturer of those grinders do not include a guard with them. And so people have told me, well, the manufacturer didn't include a guard, therefore it's not required. That is not correct. The reason that they don't include the guard on a bigger grinder is because the guard depends on the type of grinding media that you're using, whether it's a cup or a cone, or whether it's a cutoff wheel, or if it's a grinding stone. They all have different types of guards that need to go with them, and you have to buy the guard specific to the type of media that you're putting on that. So when you're out doing your inspection, looking around, again, looking for things like machine guarding or hand tool guarding, other things are appropriate while we're there. Okay, so that takes us through the OSHA top 10. There are many other things that could be inspected, like people stopping at stop signs and how they're driving. We'll talk a little bit more about behavior next month when we get done. But before I wrap up, I just want to kind of go over your inspection report. I've seen all kind of inspection reports. I've seen inspection reports that carry that get forwarded on up the chain of command. But one thing that I do know that about the inspection reports that need to be, make sure that you're always putting down who is going to do what by when it comes to that report, so that the next month when you do your inspection again, you don't find the same things wrong, that things are actually getting closed. Having some sort of action tracking system that can help you with that would be an important piece. But always remember those 3 questions: who will do what by when it comes to cleaning up actions. Like I said earlier in the call today, if you come across things that you can fix while you're doing the inspection, just fix it at the moment during the time that you're there. And in fact, one of the best practices that I've seen many years ago working at a mine up in Wyoming, they always sent an operations person from that area that was being inspected and a mechanic along with you or along with me while I was out doing an inspection. So they helped with the safety inspections at the time, and they would generally, if they could just fix the problem at the moment, then they would do it. And that took, for example, if you find a hose in a walkway that causes a tripping hazard, it's not being used, coil it up and put it away. You can, again, like I said, write it down on the inspection report so that the information gets shared with other people in the facility to remind people to take care of issues. But leaving it on the report and taking it in, if it's something that you can fix, kind of a stupid, silly, needless, immature thing to do. So make sure that if you're finding things that are wrong, if you can fix it, just fix it. Go ahead and document it. Another suggestion might be taking a camera with you. Now, some plants don't allow photography, and that's fine. Some plants don't allow cell phones. That's also fine. If that's not something that you can do where you work, then that's great. But photography is a good thing as long as you can show it in proper context as to what was done. And then you want to make sure that if you fix it, that you take the photograph showing that the condition was fixed. One last thing to think about when you're doing inspections and generating lists of things that are incorrect or need to be fixed. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to follow up on these things and make sure that they get closed. Because I've been involved with inspections, I've been involved with regulatory inspections where an OSHA inspector has come on and they find out that this has been listed for the last 4 months on the plant walk around, and the questions start coming about why has this not been taken care of. And so again, inspections are important. They give you an opportunity to go out and spend time in the workforce talking with people and finding out how work is being done. If you're a leader, if you're a safety professional, or if you're a company leader, it's a good opportunity to engage with your folks, but make sure that whatever you discover while you're doing your inspections is taken care of in a timely manner, because you don't want to tie that noose around your neck. Something's wrong, you need to have the commitment to go out and fix it. And of course, if you're the kind of person that's out there doing inspections, you're probably already cut from that cloth that says that that's what you will do. All right, really quickly, just to kind of start where we or end where we started, the 5 things that really make a great safety program or can improve any safety program, whether you're just starting or whether you've got a mature one, is to make sure that you've got engagement from your team members. Engagement during an inspection is an important thing. You ask questions, people can respond. Make sure that you understand what the risks are that are out there and that you're proactively identifying and managing risks. Your inspection program can help you do that. It can help you take risk out of the workplace by fixing broken stuff or identifying new ways to go about doing your job in a way that reduces the risk. Communication skills are important, making sure that you're communicating. We covered that last month, talking about making sure that you're communicating to be understood and that you're taking time to understand the things that your people can tell you. Today, we've gone over the real improvements that you can find and see during inspections. And even though we went over the top 10 things that OSHA is writing citations for, which are a great place to start if you've not been doing inspections, going out with an eye to look at those things, there are many, many other things that could be inspected and should be inspected while you're there. Also, again, going back to the concept that we talked about of dividing your plant up or your location up or your property up and making sure that people are responsible for specific places in not only keeping things in a safe and healthy manner, but also in making sure that the inspections get done. And then next month, when we get back together a month from now, we're going to talk about observations and how we can dealing with people and behaviors. Okay. So if anybody has any questions, now would be a great time to ask them or to share them. If you'd like, you need to put your hand up or you can just jump in and share. Anybody got any thoughts or questions? If not, then I'll go ahead and wrap up. I always show this slide. If you got your phone, you can sign up for more of our webinars. We've got one more in a month. And that's the one in the center. Just scan that. It'll take you to the web page where you can sign up for the next one. If you'd like to work with my company, Argo Safety, Health, and Environment Solutions, you can check us out on our website or scan that QR code that'll go there. If you've got questions or comments, please feel free to reach out. Thank you and have a great day.